Okay. We are at 1:30, Peter. I think we can call it a go. What do you think?
Please, Rahana, thank you.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. I am Rehana Irani Family, board member and a co-chair of the NECBC. And thank you for being here. We have close to 150 people getting on the call now, and this is the second of the series of conversations on the impact of tariffs on the US-Canada relationship, and specifically New England-Canada relationship. We see the in business dealings between New England and Canada as one of the most impactful bilateral relationships that exists. And at NECBC, we are here to help promote that relationship and support the businesses that are working on both sides of the border. So if you're interested in dialogues like this, please make sure to join our NECBC family. And we have conferences coming up. We have our next economic conference, April 16th. So make sure to join us there and stay tuned for more impactful conversations on the ongoing issues around tariff and their impact. So with that, we're going to start this very timely conversations, and a big thank you to our panel and our esteemed facilitator, Peter, for jumping on today. And Peter, with no further ado, I'll pass it on to you to talk about, to start the conversation. Thank you. And I think you're on mute.
Rahana, thank you very much. I'm doing that 4 years into this, and I probably will continue to. So thank you very much for those wonderful opening remarks. And thank you. Many of you we know were with us about a month ago when the topic of new tariffs first came on the scene, and we focused our first event on what they mean for the energy sector. Today, we want to look at a variety of other business sectors. And just to orient you, we had a bit of a change. Isabel Exo from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce at the last minute was not available. As you can understand, everybody connected with U.S.-Canada trade is running around in circles, and things are changing by the hour, as we will get to in a moment. But let me introduce you to the people whom we're going to hear from today. Matthew Holmes, Executive Vice President, International Chief of Public Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Christy Pentima, President and CEO of the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, giving a New England perspective. Derek Nybor, President and CEO of the Forest Products Association of Canada, FPAC. And we're also very grateful and excited to announce that we'll be able, a little before 1 o'clock, U.S. Senator Peter Welch from Vermont has made time to participate in the webinar and give us a literally up-to-the-minute perspective from Washington. Let me go, since this is such a fast-moving topic, I'll take a couple minutes at the top just to level set everybody on where we are with the latest headlines. 25% U.S. tariffs, 10% tariffs on energy went into effect at the beginning of the day Tuesday. Then yesterday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, we heard about a 30-day reprieve on imports of autos and vehicles and auto parts made by USMCA compliant automakers. We, at the stroke of midnight today, Canadian retaliatory tariffs went into effect on $30 billion worth of annual U.S. imports, including orange juice, peanut butter, varieties of alcohol, motorcycles, apparel, and footwear. And Canada has started a 21-day review of a plan to impose new tariffs on 125 billion in additional imports from the United States. And we've heard from Premier Ford in Ontario that they are looking to put a tax on electricity exports to Minnesota, Michigan, New York, and potentially block exports of nickel to the United States. Now, I told you that this is changing up to the minute. Literally within the last hour, we heard from U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on CNBC saying that President Trump could delay the 25% tariffs for all goods and services that are USMCA compliant. And to quote directly from his CNBC appearance, and this comes from Politico, quote, "It's not likely to be just the automakers. I think it's likely that it will cover all USMCA compliant goods and services, so that these new tariffs would potentially go away for at least 30 days. What USMCA compliant goods and services are, that's obviously a question we're going to dig into um, in, in some detail today. Finally, just to give a flavor of the level of the conversation at this point, we heard from Prime Minister Trudeau on Tuesday about Canadians being reasonable and polite, something we here in New England certainly know and love. But he says we will not back down from a fight, not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. Addressing our president very directly, Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We heard back from President Trump on Truth Social. Please explain to Governor Sick Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff on the United States, our reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. Let me just very quickly, many of you on the last NECBC tariff webinar have seen this, but just to level set on New England states, the tremendous quantities of both exports and imports. We're looking at $28.4 billion worth of goods getting imported into the region total. We'll make these slides available later as well. And since the issue of illegal border crossings and fentanyl are such a big part of this whole conversation, we just think it's always important to make clear just what Canada's contribution is to these issues. 1.5% of border apprehensions are from Canada as opposed to Mexico. And if you look at fentanyl seizures at the border, Canada, 0.2% of the fentanyl coming in that's being seized. So with that, let me begin our conversation today with great thanks to our visiting speakers. And I want to start with Matthew Holmes from the Canadian Chamber. First of all, if it's okay to ask you straight from the headlines, what's your assessment of this reference to the new tariffs being lifted on USMCA compliant goods and products? What do you understand that to say, and what might it mean for the next 30 days?
Yeah, well, first, Peter, Rahana, and any CBC members and everybody involved, thanks, warm thanks for the invitation. And I grew up in Montreal. I did some high school in Providence, Rhode Island. And I think these sorts of exchanges are why we're good neighbors and strong trading partners. And so I really value the relationship. I've spent a ton of time. I lived in New Brunswick for many years too, and spent all my summers often through Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and my winters too, skiing. So for many Canadians, this is a deep relationship. Most of the Canadian population lives within about 100 miles of the border. And so, we're very north-south oriented. We have a lot of relationships here. Lutnick's response, or his sort of hints today, I guess my immediate response is wondering what they've gained in the last 24 hours. And I mean, in our opinion, most trade between the two countries is USMCA compliant. So obviously interested in what his interpretation of that phrase is. We've had a long-standing trade relationship, starting with the Auto Pact in the 60s, moving into a bilateral trade agreement, and then that became the NAFTA agreement, and then it was renegotiated under the first Trump presidency, and that's the USMCA we're under today. So if the general experience in Canada right now, the sentiment is that we're playing a game of whack-a-mole. The goalposts keep moving. There's a new deadline just about every week. There's a new context or rationalizing of that deadline, whether it's fentanyl and border security, both very legitimate issues that we care about as well, or whether it's some sort of trade disparity in the trade relationship, or whether it's a certain sector. These reasons that are being provided are many. The deadlines are many, and the feeling is that regardless of what happens today or yesterday or tomorrow, the sentiment is we're going to be dealing with this for a while. And so Canadians are putting their seatbelts on, putting a helmet on, and getting ready for the roller coaster.
Very well said. Chris DiPentima from Connecticut Business and Industry Association would love to hear your assessment of where we are and what seems to be happening, and you know, a kind of 40,000-foot overview of what you're hearing from your members in Connecticut about how they see this tariff war affecting their business.
Yeah, well, Peter, thanks for having me on, and to the organization as a whole for making this very educational. I'll just follow on what Matthew just said with this whack-a-mole concept. What we're hearing from our members, and CBI has thousands of businesses across the state. We're the state business council or chamber, and we're also the state manufacturing association. And the follow on Matthew, it's just uncertainty. They're starving for the latest information. They're not too sure how to plan or react. And businesses want stability, certainty, and predictability. I mean, that's all they ever want, especially when it comes to policy, lawmakers, and government. And as everyone knows, we've had a run in businesses of a lot of unpredictability over the last 5 years with the pandemic, supply chain challenges, then massive wage increases because of the Great Resignation, Great Retirement, then inflationary pressures, interest rates rising, especially in the U.S. And now we've got, you know, this tariff being implemented, being paused, being implemented again, then retaliation tariffs, then the automotive sector paused yesterday, and just 20 minutes ago, the Wall Street Journal issuing an article that says, well, stuff coming from Mexico under the USMCA is okay, but where are we going with the rest of this? And that just is that whack-a-mole unpredictability. Businesses can't plan, can't survive, really can't operate on that. And we've been hearing from a lot of businesses over the past couple months, with all this uncertainty, waiting for it to unfold, they're pausing. And you never want to see commerce pause, right? You always want to see the wheels of commerce, the wheels of business activity move forward. And if businesses are pausing on investments, capital, equipment, hiring potentially, wage increases, training, that's a bad thing for any economy, the Connecticut economy, the U.S. economy. So that's what we're hearing from businesses. The reason why the tariffs are such a big issue for Connecticut, you had us listed up there as one of the top trade partners with Canada. Canada is Connecticut's largest export partner at $2.1 billion. Most folks don't realize Connecticut's a very manufacturing rich and heavy state, top 10 in the country as far as percentage of GDP. Manufacturing is 12.5% of our GDP. Aerospace dominates that, as well as defense industry and medical devices. In fact, one of our largest employers, Pratt Whitney, has a facility here, and then we have one up in Canada as well. And so there's a lot of commerce that goes across the borders. And because of the original USMCA, you know, 1.0, under Trump 1.0, a lot of Connecticut businesses moved products that were being purchased from Asia to being purchased from Canada or Mexico. And so Canada and Mexico have become our largest trade partners over the last couple of years, and we've been able to move product across. And as a result, the exports and imports in Connecticut have grown quite a bit, which I think is what we all wanted to see under the USMCA agreement that was hatched. But now these tariffs will significantly pause them and obviously add a lot of increases to the cost, which will just drive up inflation for the consumers when it's all said and done.
Yeah, thank you. And we got a lot to drill back into there, particularly with aerospace and that very important nexus between us. Derek Nyborg with Forest Products Association of Canada would love to have you introduce us quickly to FPAC and whom you represent, what they do, and then delve into within your industry sector, how you see this playing out on both sides of the border if we do get into this 25% tariff and retaliatory tariffs from Canada.
Yeah, listen, thanks for the opportunity. So Forest Products Association of Canada represents the full value chain of forestry in Canada, from the forest management work we do. And on the product side, it would be everything from hardwood and softwood lumber and solid wood products to pulp and paper to bioenergy and biomaterials, anything made from wood fiber. The interesting thing too about forestry is we're a really interconnected chain. Like if the sawmills aren't running, then the pulp and paper mills don't have chips to feed their mills. So we have a really integrated supply chain. And also that integration is not just in Canada. We for decades have built this two-way, well-oiled machine that's getting lumber and products into and out of the United States. And the 10-year average, so 2014 to 2024, if you look just at the lumber side of things, the US has been able to satisfy about 69% of its domestic demand. The majority of the gap, the average is about 25% with single digits coming from the EU. But it's been an important partnership, and we still got over, I think, 10,000 people in North Carolina that still don't have a home after Hurricane Helene, and we're looking at LA, and it's an important partnership that we built to easily move product into the US, and it's brought about strength and security and opportunity from a North American perspective. And I think one of the things too on this broad-based tariff that's a challenge is our international competitors in Brazil and the EU, Brazil mainly on the pulp side, EU mainly on the lumber side, they've now got a 25% leg up because of this broad-based decision. So that's another complicating factor for us if this continues. On the pulp and paper side, we've got about $1 billion worth of product going south every month, and another 700 million coming north. There's a lot of the properties. The real advantage we have in forestry in Canada is our trees are long, cold growing cycles, 70, 80, 90, 100 years before these trees are harvested. And because of that, the properties of the wood fiber are really durable, and they're stronger, and they're good to build with, and they're not going to warp. And that quality extends to our pulp products, which companies like Procter and Gamble and others turn into Bounty and all these great high quality tissue products. So the other piece that I feel is not being talked about here beyond the stuff that we are talking about a lot in terms of the trade relationship and the economy and the shared benefits for our people. In Canada, we've got a significant quality offering in terms of the type of fiber that we're selling into the market. So I just, I think as a Canadian, it's just so disappointing. And I know, life's not fair, but I do feel, I'm an Ottawa Senators season ticket holder. To see the American national anthem booed in Ottawa, we boo our own team on a regular basis, but I've never seen that. This is really, it's going to take a while to come back from this. And I think these dialogues are really important, because I think, as the Prime Minister said, and I thought Premier Doug Ford from Ontario did a great job. We love Americans. We view you're an extension of our family, which makes the pushing through of this just that much more challenging. I think if we can't come to terms and admit that there is an emotional part to this too, we're pretty hurt here over this. And I hope through dialogues like this we can work through. Last thing I'll say, really appreciated seeing most of the congressional delegation from Maine, and there's a piece in the Bangor paper where Senators Collins and King and one of the members of Congress came out opposed to this. I think those voices within the U.S. to try to bring some common sense to this are going to be really, really important, and we really, really appreciate that.
Right. Before I go back to Matthew, just to drill down one level, thinking about wood imports into New England, are we right to think big U.S. states for lumber, Oregon, Washington, Georgia, Arkansas, are we right to think that New England gets particularly hard hit because if we got to turn to domestic sources, they're much farther away, and they potentially are not of the same quality to withstand New England winters that imported Canadian lumber would be? Is that, Derek, do you think that's a fair observation?
Oh yeah, it is. The other thing I would say too is, I was in Albany last year, and mass timber is a growing opportunity in terms of building bigger and taller with wood, and there's just not the capacity in the United States on this. I think Canadians, I don't think any Canadian would have any issue with the U.S. talking about, we want to bolster domestic capacity. We want to do more here at home. I think every country aspires to do that. But I think it's the way this has been done, basically ripping up an agreement that's been signed, upending decades long of integrated approaches and work and value chains. And as I look at some of the comments coming out of some U.S. folks in the U.S. Softwood Lumber Coalition or or some Republicans who are talking about, this is going to be great for domestic manufacturing. Well, if you want to start a new sawmill, it's going to take you 2 to 3 years to get a dry kiln. You need equipment, you need people. You can't just overnight just say, well, we're going to cut more trees and make more things and provide things here. That takes a lot of time. And a very integrated, long planned out plan to get there. And that's not what this is about. So I think that, I think that's something that's also not been talked about. And I'm really careful when I say that kind of stuff too, because listen, Americans are going to make decisions that are right for them. I respect how Americans voted. There were some very clear concerns about the economy, very clear concerns about trade agreements, not everybody sharing in the prosperity. I get all that. But, to me, this is a knee-jerk reaction that's going to do nothing but bring more costs and bring more pain onto American families who are trying to get into affordable homes. And we got about 900,000 workers in forestry on both sides of the border that share in this integrated system that we built. And, I feel for those workers and for Americans who are going to have a harder time getting into housing because of these costs going up.
Thank you. Matt, the Canadian Chamber has done some great work, analysis at both the national level, state and provincial level, and even drilling down to which Canadian cities and metropolitan areas are likely to be hit the hardest. I wonder if you might walk us through, some of the most important headlines from that research.
Yeah, sure. And actually, I remember the first night where the infamous Truth Social post declaring that tariffs were coming for Canada was issued. I was hosting David Frum in Toronto for a business leaders dinner, and we were doing an on-stage fireside chat. And about 20 minutes before he took the stage, this post came out declaring these new 25% tariffs were on the way. And ever since then, it's been quite a ride. So one of the things the Canadian Chamber of Commerce did in those first days was we worked with our business data lab, which is our economics team, to develop a report. It's called the Partners in Prosperity Report, and it looks holistically at both economies and the impacts that a 10% or a 25% tariff regime would have, especially in a retaliatory environment, which obviously we're walking into now, both from the Canadian perspective, but also, we're seeing other major nations that are being touched by this threaten to do the same. European Union, of course, China as well. So in that retaliatory environment, the headline that we're finding is this sort of 25% approach will be recessionary in Canada, guaranteed by probably July, mid-year. We're seeing a 2.6% hit to GDP in Canada, and about $1,900 Canadian to each individual in the country in terms of the impact on their spending power and their own wealth. But the thing that's important here is
Matt, 1,900 in both lost income and higher prices.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
In terms of the hit to GDP, but the price impact that will be faced by individuals. And with when we look at 34 states have Canada as their number one trading partner, and we start to look at what that retaliatory environment looks like, our model found that US would see a 1.6% decline to its GDP and about a $1,300 impact for individuals. And I just saw something, I think it was in the Post earlier this week, estimating that at about 1,200. So it looks like we're seeing that number validated elsewhere. We looked at the main sectors that are impacted, oil, energy products, of course. And I think in New England, obviously, we've all seen with concern the notices that went out to direct consumers on the impact tariffs would have on their home heating. That will ripple into to businesses as well, I'm sure, and be inflationary. There's a lot of trade in the auto sector. Obviously, that's had a lot of attention in the last few days, and that's a highly integrated industry. It's component parts and materials and manufacturing and assembly lines are effectively distributed over numerous provinces and states. So you could have a vehicle that might be final assembly in Canada, but it's probably majority been assembled in the US, and it's sourcing components, tool makers and talent from all over both countries to make that vehicle that eventually, might be produced in Canada and sold in the US or vice versa. So highly integrated market there. Base metals, pharmaceuticals, transport, other transport vehicles, chemicals, wood and related products, as Derek's already outlined. So the list goes on and on. Those are the top lines in terms of the immediate impact to both economies. What we did following, and we can get into that a little later, Peter, is we did a more of a subnational look. And so as we look to how are we going to have this conversation at a meaningful level, you can have that sort of, this many Olympic sized swimming pools, or you can actually talk about what it means for an individual supply chain or an individual community, because that's what this comes down to. It's job losses, it's higher prices, it's hitting both consumers and businesses at the affordability, and as Chris already described, the uncertainty is paramount. So and that just doesn't create the conditions for business. So I'm happy to share this. We have an online tracker where you can select your state, you can select the province, and you can see what are the reciprocal trade between those two jurisdictions. What does this mean in terms of vehicle and transportation, or energy and raw materials for Rhode Island's two-way trade with New Brunswick, or for Maine's trade with Quebec? And so once you start looking at that, you can have an informed conversation about, wait a second, this is going to be damaging. This is going to hurt us just as much as it will hurt Canada. And then we can have a strong conversation about, well, what does the governor think of that? What do members of Congress think of that? What do local mayors think of that for their cities? And that's what we're driving towards. So the third and final piece that we've been working on is we just put out some cities data. So looking at the highest impact Canadian cities that are very trade exposed, that are very export oriented towards the US. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a similar study published on the US cities that are most trade exposed to Canada. And so a little early warning for you here: Hartford, Pittsburgh, and Philly all show up on that list in terms of having a above average exposure to Canadian economy and to any retaliation from Canada.
No, we noted St. John, New Brunswick, if I recall correctly, #1 worst exposed Canadian city. And I know why, but tell everybody why that is.
Yeah, St. John, New Brunswick, way off the charts. The #2 city is Calgary, and the two of them are really Calgary, Alberta, and the two are really for similar reasons. It's the amount of crude oil and oil and energy exports that come through those cities, and that are really concentrated there. You have 80% of the capacity for refining out of St. John is exported to the US, and so a major market there. And if you start putting a tariff in place there, you'll see that could have quite a high impact. Seafood and forestry also top New Brunswick exports, and so as you pull those together, you roll those up. Now this is an economics model, and so individual companies will have their own contracts, their own pricing mechanisms around how they deal with a possible tariff or this sort of situation. So it's conceptual, but it shows you where are the hot spots that it will really be affected. Also in the top 40 cities list on the Canadian side, Halifax and Fredericton both show up. And Quebec, a number of Quebec cities that are major suppliers of aluminum to the US. I mean, we provide something like 60% of America's aluminum sourcing, and in terms of what's imported. And as you start to see those industries, steel and aluminum, targeted with their own tariff structures, that's going to just add the cost to everyday goods, whether it's that pickup truck you want to buy. I've seen estimates that it'll add $3,000 to $8,000 to the retail price just in aluminum alone.
Well, we certainly have found, as New England Canada Business Council, a data point that many New Englanders are not aware of. 80% of our gasoline and diesel coming from Canada, and a very large share of that coming from the Irving refinery in St. John. 90% of our jet fuel at Logan International Airport in Boston comes from Canada. Christy Pentima, I wonder if you had heard anticipated that figure about Hartford being in the top 3 US cities for negative economic exposure from tariffs.
Yeah, not surprisingly. Again, I mentioned in my opening the relationship that Pratt has having a facility here in East Hartford, Connecticut, which is part of that Hartford County impact, and of course the facility up there in Montreal, and so there's that is not only just the jet engines, it's the some components that are going from the huge supply chain that we have in Connecticut. We have 4,600 manufacturers in Connecticut, about 160,000 people employed. Most of those manufacturers are supply chain manufacturers. Pratt & Whitney, Connecticut and Canada have about 600 suppliers here in Connecticut. And then our medical device supply chain is pretty robust that I mentioned. So these are components that are being made here that then get shipped to Canada, either component level or even sub-assembly engine level, that are getting hit with these tariffs. And so that's gonna not be surprising that Hartford's gonna have major impact there, negative impact on the economy. I think $165 million just in aerospace goods alone, going back and forth with, or $400 million, I'm sorry, which is 20% of the total 2.3 billion that we ship to Canada. 20% of that is those aerospace components. So $400 million plus impact negatively. So that's going to be a major issue. And when you look at it, National Association of Manufacturers released, it's not surprising, 1/3 of the products that are manufactured in the US, the components, come from Canada or Mexico. And they're estimating that the costs are going to go up because of these tariffs to the US alone, $144 billion just to the US manufacturing sector alone, not including forestry, not including those energy segments that you talked about. So that's just a tremendous impact. And Connecticut, as I mentioned, relies heavily on our manufacturing sector. It's not surprising Hartford's going to bear a big brunt of that.
Right. How well, what kind of handle do you think you have at this point on what it means in terms of jobs in Connecticut? If every jet engine going up to Canada suddenly gets 25% more expensive to the Canadians, how many jobs do we potentially lose in Connecticut?
It's going to be a big number. 160,000 jobs in manufacturing. Our aerospace sector is about half of that, with 80,000 jobs. And as I mentioned, businesses are pausing now. We had 75,000 job openings in Connecticut. About 7,000 of those are in manufacturing. We've been trying to fill them for a while. This goes back to pre-pandemic numbers with the great tsunami and the retirement that was happening, and trying to get more and more people into the pipeline of manufacturing, which we finally have done. But because of the demand growth that has happened post-pandemic, we haven't been able to fill all those jobs. And this goes back to something that was just mentioned before on the forest side is when you do tariffs and protectionism, is to bring jobs back to your community, your region, your country, whatever you're talking about. The one thing we've been hearing from businesses is they can't fill the jobs that they already have for the current demand level. So if you're going to add more demand, they just don't have the capacity to handle that additional demand. So it's not like our businesses in Connecticut are going out there saying, hey, more tariffs, we need more demand in the US and more demand in Connecticut. We can't fill capacity for the demand we already have with 75,000 job openings. If we had 0% unemployment in Connecticut, we'd still have north of 20,000 job openings. We just don't have the population growth in the US. We don't have the immigration policies in the US that support that capacity that's needed to handle current demand, let alone future demand that would come from this protectionism type of policy movement. And so the businesses are not looking for this at all from a capacity point of view or demand point of view. And obviously not looking at it from a cost point of view, it's going to be very detrimental to our region.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I want to be fair and balanced, and we'll get back to Derek and Matt. Are you hearing from any businesses in Connecticut who've said to you, we like this, we actually like this protectionism, it's going to help us compete more fairly, it's going to help us grow our business? Is that a message that's made it to CBIA?
Yeah, we've heard from businesses, Peter, more relative to Asia and the uncompetitive nature or unlevel playing field with Asia. We have not heard directly relative to Mexico or China. Again, because of the USMCA that was put in place, so much goods moved to North America from China. I think when I looked at the last numbers, about $1 billion in the trade that we used to have with China here in Connecticut has decreased by $1 billion, and that $1 billion has moved to Mexico and Canada. So we're not hearing from businesses that want this type of tariff with Canada or Mexico. It's more leveling the playing field with Asia. And the other thing to keep in mind, even beyond our manufacturing industry in Connecticut and why businesses aren't clamoring for this, we rely heavily on Canada for a good percentage of our energy. And Connecticut's one of the highest cost energy states in the country, and New England in general, the high cost energy region in the country. And the fact that the tariffs are going to impact the energy sources coming from Canada, whether it's hydro coming from Canada or the gas that we bring down as well, that's going to increase the cost of the manufacturers. And most of our manufacturers are supply chain manufacturers. So remember, they're getting increases from the raw material. They can't necessarily pass it on to their customer. Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, Boeing, Airbus, whoever it is. So they're going to get squeezed in this middle here, which is just going to erode their margins. And they're going to have some really, really challenging decisions to make. Do I cut staff? Do I sell my business? Do I go out of business? All the things you don't want when you're looking for a thriving economy.
Right. Very well said. We're getting a couple questions in the Q&A box, and I want to encourage everybody to get those out there. And Matt, you'll be pleased to know, I was going to ask you later, but people are already saying the tracker you mentioned. What do these tariffs mean to my state? If you want to throw that website address into the chat that everybody can see at some point that's convenient for you, thank you in advance for doing that. Would love to ask Derek or Matt, we've obviously covered a lot of ground, but I wonder if there are any unforeseen or underappreciated consequences that you see to this tariff battle that people aren't yet talking about. I mean, that we haven't talked about so far today, but ways in which this will play out and have negative repercussions in places that people might not be readily thinking of.
Yeah, I think a couple things. First thing I want to say, I want to give a shout out to the mayors on both sides of the border. I think we've seen, I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago. I bumped into the mayor of Kitchener, Ontario, the mayor of London, Ontario. I think they were in engagement with the National Association of Counties and the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities. And I think the U.S. Conference of Mayors has passed a resolution opposing this in the past few days. So, I think those cross-border relationships are going to be really important. I think there's a big trust issue here in terms of, can you trust making a deal with the United States? And at what point is that going to affect, capital doesn't want to go to unpredictable places. And this is a bigger kind of comment beyond just Canada and the US, is if the rules of the game are going to change midway through the second period, like how much confidence can I have in investing? And let's not forget, Canada is I think we're still number 2 after Japan in terms of foreign direct investment into the United States, in that 700 to 800 billion. So, to be treating Canada like this kind of add-on, there's significant Canadian capital invested and committed to the United States. And I think there is a broader question here, even in Canada. If the game plan here is a new and improved USMCA, how can we trust the people we're sitting across the table with if they're prepared to rip up agreements anyway? So I think from a Canadian perspective, that issue of trust, I did mention the other consequences of, you're now going to rather bring product in from Brazil or Russia or the European Union versus getting it from Canada. I think that's another one. And maybe the last thing I'll say, as a bit of an add-on to Chris's comments on business voices, I met with my American counterpart in the pulp and paper sector, and her board, mainly US based manufacturers of tissue and packaging and whatnot, absolutely opposed to this. They see the benefit of that relationship. In our membership, in our sector in North America, the only group that I've seen really, really keen south of the border for this to continue to go on is those who own private lands and are selling wood into the system for very obvious reasons. It's going to drive up the price and it's going to drive up their revenues, and it's going to make things more expensive for the people they're selling to. So I'll leave it there and I'll turn it over to Matt if he has anything to add.
Yeah, and there's a few consequences here, and Derek touched on a number of them. Really, it's a head scratcher, and when we, we haven't even talked about.
We're still joint.
There's a, yeah, there we go.
Sorry. Apologies.
We haven't talked about
John Gulliver, who's president of NECBC and a fabulous leader, is being cursed with internet weirdness today. That's why you haven't heard from him yet. We don't know if it has anything to do with tariffs, but our heart goes out to you, John. Anyhow, Matt, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, well, I was just going to say, when you start looking at other things like nickel, we're probably the largest supplier of nickel to the US. I'm not sure if there's a US nickel mine any longer. There might just be one processor, but most of it is, a large share, maybe 40, 40% of the American nickel need is coming from Canadian processors and mines. If you don't buy it from Canada, you're pretty much buying it from Russia or an intermediary of China. Nickel's pretty essential for most of your defense industrial base, your munitions, your F-35s, not to mention, sophisticated telco and advanced communications equipment. You go on to potash. If you're not buying potash from Canada, which is about 80% of your potash fertilizer supply for American farmers, especially the Corn Belt, but throughout the whole ecosystem, you're buying it from probably Russia. Maybe some of it's through Brazil. But again, there's a head scratcher to all of this, which is the net beneficiaries generally seem to be Putin or Xi, Russia or China. When you start looking at decoupling from the productive and I would say allied economic relationship that we have on the continent here. And so that's part of what Canadians are saying to themselves, like, what's the end game here? We thought we were in lockstep. We thought we were working together on common concerns and issues. And I think this past summer, I can point to concerns in the automaking sector about Chinese EVs flooding the market and using their vehicles both with a potential cyber threat, but also to flood a lot of aluminum and steel into the country. Well, Canada shared that exact same concern, and within days, we put out the exact same tariff structure that the US did. We put 100% tariffs on the EVs, and we put 25% on any aluminum and steel coming in. So, we thought we were taking a continental approach to this. We thought we were partners. And to Derek's point, you rip up our trade agreement once, shame on you. You rip it up twice, shame on us. And so I think what we're going to see, and there's this moment right now in Canada where people are flying the flag. It has brought us together in a way that I have not seen in a generation at least. And people are, the holy cow in Canada, the provincial governments control liquor in our country, right? All liquor purchasing. And we're the largest, Ontario's the largest buyer of alcohol in the world. The secret in Canada that most people don't realize is it's very difficult to actually buy like a British Columbia wine when you live in Ontario or in Nova Scotia. We don't trade well across the country with ourselves. We trade really well with the rest of the world and north-south to the US. Well, the premiers yesterday with the federal government just announced you're going to be able to buy alcohol across the country at the same time that they've just pulled all the American booze off the shelves. It's gone. You can't buy it.
Saw that picture out of Ontario.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Like
it's shocking. And this is something we never thought we'd ever get our act together to do. And so there are barriers internally that are coming down fast. And there is a casting of the gaze to other world markets and saying, look, if we can't trust our historic neighbors and partners, well, we're not going to trust them and we're going to go somewhere else. And that's a really unfortunate thing, I have to say. Like as Derek said, we're family, we're friends, and there's a certain trade adjacency. We're always going to be beside each other. We're always going to trade with each other, but it's sending shockwaves that will take a long time to correct for.
Derek, we have a question from a reporter that really gets to things that are really real. Cost of toilet paper. What do the tariffs do to that or other types of paper products?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's going to be determined on what happens on the supply side, right? Like I think the thing that we're hopeful we can get quick resolution on this so that we don't start seeing closures, because you start to see, and we saw it during you think of the pandemic and the rush on toilet paper. There was a rush on it because people worry about stores being closed, but also there was concern about factories and mills going down. So I'm not too worried about that yet. I think the auto industry, I think there was like a 5 to 8 day window. Everything is going to close. I think we've got a little bit of runway here in our sector. But if this tariff piece does drag out for weeks or months, you are going to start to see certain curtailments and impacts on product supply, and including toilet paper and other products, and consequently an increase in price, and that's bad news for everybody.
Yeah.
And Matthew,
Great question.
Peter, so I just
Yeah,
want to
please.
answer that. I'm sorry, if you don't mind me jumping in. We hear a lot about this going on right now. There's probably 340 million Americans that are looking to hoard things that are
Yeah.
going to go up in cost. I mean, the one thing we've talked to the business community about, and this goes back to capacity, is at least in the US, and I don't know how it's been in Canada, with all the things I talked about, inflation, interest rates, challenges finding people, supply chain issues, there's been a big inventory burn off post-pandemic. There's not a lot of inventory sitting around. So hoarding is no doubt going to happen, but it's also just going to drive up costs because you're going to end up with less supply, this massive amount of demand. What are businesses going to do? They're going to raise their prices. I mean, they're going to be entitled to raise their prices, and they're going to get those higher prices because of that hoarding. So I just want to jump in and say that it's nothing that can be prevented. I'm with Eric. I think there's a little bit of a runway here, but the inventory levels that we've been seeing in our businesses are at a low point in the last 5 years because of it's harder to carry inventory nowadays with these higher costs.
Yeah. Really great question from Dean Schwartz for everybody. Is there any upside to this? I know, Derek, you mentioned, there are certain private lumber forest owners who potentially make some more money. But if we're trying to make a fair case for the current U.S. administration policy around tariffs on Canada, is there any good that it's doing? And welcome, Senator Welch. We're going to get to you ASAP.
Yeah, and I'll maybe leave it to my American friends to talk about where they see the benefits. I'll talk about where we're seeing benefits on the Canadian side, and I'm not thrilled it's taken us this to get us here, but we now finally have governments across the country calling us saying, how can we make operating easier? How can we take costs out of the system? How can we maintain our high environmental and all these standards that Canada holds and the values that we hold dear? But how can we help business grow more? How can we grow jobs? Honestly, I've been in this job at FPAC for 9 years, and I can think of one minister in the last 9 years who's asked me that question. Most of my meetings with the government have been, we're going to do this new regulation, or we're going to add this on, and it's just been, but it's like everybody's now found religion. How can we grow the Canadian economy? How can we diversify beyond the US? And so I think in Canada, that's been one. The other piece is, I think I can speak for most industry groups when I'm saying that, the first work I've been doing is with our labor partners. What can we do if we hit any impacts that are going to hurt jobs in our country? How do we protect workers and their families? How do we keep people tied to their place of employment through wage sharing or top ups, or how can we exercise our employment insurance system? So I'd say two things. Number one, I think it's necessitating a new way of looking at how do we do better on our own and with other partners. And number two, very quickly, how do we help our own people here if this thing gets really bad? And that's what Canada's all about.
Let me take moderator prerogative. I do want to get back to Chris and Matt on that, but Senator Welch, it looks like you're in place and ready to go. And on behalf of the New England Canada Business Council, I want to express our great thanks to you for making time in your very busy schedule to be here today. We've been having a rich conversation about the many, many negative impacts from this tariff and trade war that has broken out, and the great sense of confusion and whiplash as we hear about new exemptions just literally from Commerce Secretary Letnick earlier this morning, that maybe the 30-day reprieve gets extended from autos and auto parts to many other USMCA compliant products. So we'd love, I guess, to ask you for an update on from the ground in Washington. Where are we, and is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, there better be. Because this is going to be incredibly damaging to us in the United States, but I think it's obviously incredibly damaging for you. And I don't know, Peter, whether you said, can somebody make a good case for this? The answer to that is no, you can't. I mean, this is a very, very destructive policy. Let me just go through it one at a time. Number one, it's very arbitrary. The authority that the president is using in order to impose these tariffs unilaterally is authority that was delegated to presidents decades ago to use tariff authority in an emergency. Under our Constitution, the tariff authority belongs to the Congress. But we've made this delegation, or Congresses before me did, and it was supposedly for national security And the meaning of that at that time had much to do with an actual military threat that is posed to the country. And obviously, the Congress would want to allow the executive to take appropriate action to protect us against a military kind of threat. But it wasn't defined that way specifically. I can see Canada from where I sit, and I haven't seen the massing of troops. So we're not really worried about a military threat from Canada. So it's bogus, all right? And what the president has done is invoked the emergency is the fentanyl that is coming across the northern border and the southern border. Well, aside from the question of whether or not that's an appropriate use of emergency under the statute, obviously we don't have the situation with Canada that we have on the southern border. There's two things. One, I guess I've got some statistics here. 1.5% of border apprehensions by the US CPB were at the Canadian border. In fentanyl seizures at the border, Mexico was 21,148 pounds. Canada was 43 pounds, 0.2%. So it's a bogus assertion of an emergency authority. There's not fentanyl, we all hate it, right? You hate it as much in Canada as we hate it in the United States. But that's not the threat. Moreover, we have total cooperation with Canada. Our law enforcement works very well with your law enforcement. So, it's a very frustrating thing for me as a senator to essentially see, from my perspective, an abuse of the emergency authority that's delegated by Congress to a president to inflict incredible damage on your economy and ours. And what I'm seeing is that in whatever the motivation of the president, who knows, but he, as you know, is devoted, it's a late day President McKinley, he's devoted to tariffs. And sometimes he's using it as a tool, he says, to crack down on fentanyl. Other times he's using it as a tool where he asserts that this is going to essentially make us a lot of money in the United States under what all economists regard as a completely discredited assertion that that your country will pay tariffs that we impose on you as opposed to our consumers. So, I think what's happening right now is there's an awareness, especially with Canada, among my colleagues, that this is going to hurt. I've been hearing you talk a little bit about how it's going to hurt your economy, and I don't want to be part of doing that since we're so closely connected with you. You're our biggest trading partner from Vermont, but we're not alone. 34 states. Canada is our biggest trading partner, and we've just enjoyed cordial and wonderful relations with you all the time. And, I personally don't want to jeopardize that. But for us in Vermont, if we have this, I was asking a deputy secretary who was up before the finance committee for his views on the tariffs, and he was stonewalling me. But I was pointing out that it looks like Vermonters would pay about 25 to 40 cents more per gallon of gas because we get a lot of our petroleum from you. We get a lot of our electricity from you, Hydro-Quebec, and so we could have a 10–15% increase in electric bills for families. And then a lot of our home heating fuel and gas comes from you, and that heating bill is a hit to Vermont families. So on basic things that are essentials in life, this is going to hurt us. And the more, and it's also going to hurt our sugar makers. Just another example. I mean, we import most of our sugar making equipment from you, and that's going to hammer our sugar makers. So my view here, in terms of light at the end of the tunnel, is that we in Congress have to be demonstrating in a very concrete way how this is going to hurt us, and point out also how it hurts you. But obviously, it's going to be a wake-up call for a lot of senators and members of Congress when these tariffs really bite the pocketbook of everyday Americans. And then, of course, down the road, it leads to that lower GDP, higher unemployment, and starts eroding the kind of structural market position that our businesses have. Just as an example, and then I'll shut up. But when you think back to the first round of Trump tariffs, that really severely affected agriculture in the Midwest and in the South, we lost markets where we lost the market share that we sent and exported. And Argentina and Brazil filled that market and they haven't gone away. So there's been a permanent reduction in our market access as a result of those tariffs from 8 years ago when President Trump was in his first term. So I'm doing all I can as a member of Congress and as a senator from Vermont to just point out how much we're going to get hurt by this. But I also am very sensitive to how much it's going to hurt who we regard as a very, very close friend and ally. And of course, that's Canada.
Right. I feel you're uniquely well placed for a very tactical question. What do we in New England do about it? We're not, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have a lot of Republicans in our delegation who have the ear of, the Senate or the House or the White House for that matter. What do you see as the best way for us to make the case and try to get some traction with Republican leadership?
Well, I think we've got good, Senator Shaheen and I we took some time on the floor to talk about the tariffs. And I think that the more the business speaks out about how this is going to hurt jobs in the economy in your state, even if it's the Democratic senators, it arms us with the factual information that is the most persuasive to our Republican colleagues. Our Republican colleagues, I think by and large, they're not tariff people, but they're going along for the ride here, from what I can see, on these presidential policies, because it's Trump and he's got a lot of persuasive powers with them, shall I say. But the case that you make to your representatives and senators is something we can then transmit to our fellow colleagues who are on the Republican side, but I think are generally open to this question of the detrimental impact on our tariffs, on our economies. And the other thing is you've got counterparts who are in Republican states or states with Republican senatorial delegations, and I urge them to join you. The fact that we've got 34 states where Canada is our major trading partner, there's got to be a lot of quote red states that are compliant or in that category. So there may be some outreach effort that you all can make to try to solicit support from some of these other states that have major trading relationship with Canada.
Right. As somebody who's obviously right in the heart of the system in the Senate, any advice you would give to Canadians as they're seeing the way Mexico is responding to this and what seems to work or not work in terms of Mexico trying to get the U.S. to back off?
Well,
ways that they can take lessons from the Mexican approach?
I'm not sure I have them. I mean, because here's the reality of this, okay? It's very arbitrary, okay? And it's whimsical. So if, are there magic words you can say that will placate President Trump? I don't know. But the fact is, it's arbitrary. And these tariffs were arbitrary the last time we went through this in the first Trump presidency. There were supposed across the board tariffs, but there were enormous numbers of exemptions. And what happened is that if you somehow were connected and could get your case before whoever in the Commerce Department was ultimately giving waivers, you would get a waiver, but your neighbor doing the same work might not. So there's an arbitrariness to this that I find really, really detrimental to good relationships and also for business stability and international stability as well. So I don't have an answer for that. I know you're in Canada, your government is totally on this, very upset about it, and is interacting with the administration. But there is a very arbitrary quality to the rollout and implementation of these tariffs. And also it's arbitrary in how they're going to be implemented, but it's also arbitrary when they're on, they're off. You get an exemption, USMCA, we got another, announcement today. So I wish I could give you the magic words, but I can't.
Yeah. Let me ask, as you and your staff are hearing from businesses and residents in Vermont, Have there been some things that have been surprising or kind of unforeseen, unanticipated consequences that this is playing out and having impacts on people that you never necessarily imagined would be negatively affected by a higher tariff?
Well, I mean, what is unifying is that everybody who's got a business has a set of relationships and expectations that are built up over time. And those are being smashed. So you've got folks who, some folks who voted for President Trump and like a lot of his policies, but are having to deal with the real world impact on what their businesses, how their business is going to be affected. So I'm seeing a lot of unity in the Vermont community, and it's everywhere from big manufacturers to organic farms that are going to be affected by this. So there's growing unity. I think there's really unity of interest here that these tariffs are just going to destabilize and threaten the well-being of our businesses.
Yeah, I certainly want to give Chris and Derek and Matt a chance to ask you, sitting in the Senate, a question. And the only other point that I guess I want to bring up before seeing if they have something they want to pose to you, is the emotional toll or neighborly toll that this is taking, and the United States national anthem getting booed in Canada, and Vermonters and Quebecois who are friends and neighbors and see each other every day. What's that like? What are you seeing? What are you hearing about the toll this is taking on what fundamentally has been a great relationship of friendship for so long?
That's really, really a good point. One of the things that I'm upset about with the way President Trump is approaching things is that he seems to embrace disruption. There's always a fair case to be made that you can't get too complacent. You got to be willing to change. You got to kick the tires and re-examine what you're doing and how you're doing it. But where you take the solid ground beneath a person's feet and you fracture it, and it's very unstable, it starts to erode trust. And so much of what's important in the success of our personal relationships, our international relationships, the running of a business is the trust that if you're an employer, you create with your employees, you create with your consumers. They know they can count on you to keep your word. They know that you'll do the best to look out after them if there's a hard decision that has to be made, and they won't just be thrown overboard. And, the approach the administration is taking is that they see a value in this disruption that creates instability, it creates uncertainty, and I think ultimately erodes trust. So that's what I think is so disturbing here on a personal, on a business, on a country-to-country level. What we used to be able to take for granted, this trust, because we did trust one another, we can't. And in the case of these tariffs, where it's having such a detrimental impact on Canada, it's a hit to the pocketbook of every Canadian. It's a hit to your GDP. Then that is heartbreaking for me, but it also has consequences down the road, because will you give the United States the benefit of the doubt as you have in the past? Always, okay? And how can you if the United States has taken a unilateral action that hurts you for no valid reason?
Yeah, no, it's uncanny. Derek Nyborg from the Forest Products Association of Canada, before you came on, was making exactly that same point about how this rattles the sense of trust and this feeling that you're playing hockey and the rules get changed in the middle of the second period, and how can we trust you to renegotiate USMCA in 2026 if you're doing all these unilateral things now?
Right. Yeah.
I wonder, I acknowledge this is a bit hypothetical and speculative, but let's say we get to some kind of truce or resolution a few months from now, and we've settled it, some level of tariffs. Do you have thoughts about what we should be thinking about now in terms of repairing the relationship between the US and Canada after the current fireworks, we hope, die down?
Well, there's an enormous amount of goodwill. I mean, I'm in Vermont, and everybody loves Canadians coming down to Vermont and everybody loves going up to Canada. You know, we've had this history of having our hockey teams play back and forth in high school, back and forth across the border. I think there's an enormous reservoir of goodwill, but I think it's going to take, you know, ideally, from my perspective, the president comes to his senses and demonstrates a lot of respect for Canada, and where if there's going to be changes in some of the mutual obligations that we have, it's a discussion. It's not blunt force object.
Right. Wonderful. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I would love to offer you the chance. Any other additional closing thoughts, Senator Welch?
No, let's just hang in. We're pals. And, you know, the thing that gives me some optimism is that this makes absolutely no sense for the United States. It makes absolutely no sense for Canada. So at a certain point, when you're doing something that you may think you want to do, but time and time again it fails, you wake up and say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do this. I'm thinking this is so not in the interest of the United States, and clearly not in the interest of Canada. And a continuation of our good relationship is so in our mutual interest that gives me some confidence we'll get there, but we've got a ways to go.
Great.
Thank you, but I'm all in. All right, anything I can do to be helpful.
Senator, we are so thankful for your time. We appreciate what a big deal it is to get this much of your time on a very, very busy day. So
Well,
thank you very much on behalf of
Canadians to come down to Vermont. We love you guys.
Very good.
See you later.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Bye-bye.
Matt or Chris would love to offer you the opportunity to weigh in, you know, some of the remarks from the senator. Any things that
Right,
particularly resonated for you, or you know, that give you thoughts for hope for a path forward?
Happy to jump in quickly here and let Chris kind of take us home. I mean, really great to hear the senator's remarks there, and we know, I think you know, we know it's a very divided Congress right now, and we know that midterms are only so long away, and that's not a partisan comment, but we're willing to sit in and wait to see where Americans choose to go once they see the full impact of this. But I think it's really heartening to hear the perspective, and of course the very real examples that were used on the sort of the neighbor relationship, and the mutual benefit we share when we have a strong commercial relationship, and strong borders, and a strong ability to rely on each other as we have historically done. So I'm heartened to hear the senator's remarks, and I think my closing would really just be that we make good things together. And if you look at the trade relationship, if you look at the sorts of things we provide, we've already talked about energy, we've talked about forestry products and other things, but when you sort of stand back and look at the big themes, about 70% of what Canada sells to the United States is ingredients, it's components, it's raw materials, and those go into made in USA products. Those go into the incredible manufacturing base and value added products that America is known around the world for. And so we're your partner in that. We're kind of part of what you make, and we make good things together. And so I think if there's one message that I want to leave the audience with, is let's continue on that track. I think it's done great things for both nations, and I think there's a future ahead if we can get back to that.
Yeah, very well said. Chris DiPentima, I certainly was struck by the senator's good point that whether we're blue states, red states, purple states, let's just keep focusing on what this means for jobs and people's incomes and people's spending power. And, you know, even if we feel like here in New England, we're pretty cut off from the current leadership, you know, telling those stories of how this is trickling down to the lives and household budgets of real people. I wonder how you reacted to that.
Yeah, Peter, that resonated with me as well. You know, when New England is a bit of a blue area, and so you feel like sometimes you don't have a voice. And it was great to hear the senator say, you know, this isn't a partisan issue. There's Republicans who are concerned about this as well. It's a bipartisan concern, leveraging those national associations, the U.S. Chamber, the National Association of Manufacturers, to make sure business voices are heard in DC. And I like him calling for that call to action to make sure those stories are told. Go down there, call your legislator, call your congressperson, your senator, whatever it takes to, but tell them what the impact is or going to be on your businesses. And those stories, that individual lobbying is so much more powerful than any one association lobbying and giving data metrics or anything. It's hearing those powerful individual stories. So certainly we're going to encourage our members to reach out to not only our federal delegation, but any relationships they have in DC to have their voices heard. We're going to use our megaphone at CBIA to broadcast testimonial stories, specific impacts on an individual, on a business, on an economy overall. And I think I call on all of us on this webinar to leverage that, make our voices heard. So it's good to hear the senator say that. And I'm with Matthew. I mean, if you look at what happened with the USMCA originally and how we as North America handled the pandemic and how our economies prospered post-pandemic because of the ability to move a lot of components from overseas to our borders that are very nearby. We were able to move products much easier, get things done much faster. I mean, just last year alone, exports in Connecticut jumped nearly 10% to Canada. 10%, 17 billion is a huge number. So that's just so, or 17 billion, that's so critical that we were able to do that. And that's because we created this structure and this infrastructure and this relationship that's so important. So that's what the economic numbers you want to see.
Right. Well, Chris, wonderful way to sum it all up and a great call to action to just keep getting the word out. Matt Holmes from the Canadian Chamber, want to thank you for being with us. Derek Nyber had let us know he needed to jump for a meeting with Senator Angus King from Maine, so he gets a hall pass for that. I just want to say again, on behalf of New England Canada Business Council, our president, John Gulliver, my colleague, Rehanna Irani-Family from the board, David Ehrlich, our executive director, so thankful, and Leo Desjardins, and a cast of thousands who helped assemble today's conversation. We are so thankful. Really appreciate all of you for joining us. And for 40 years, New England Canada Business Council has been all about preserving and strengthening and growing this wonderful business and trade and relationship of culture and friendship that we've enjoyed. And in many ways, we feel like we've never been more needed than we are now. And if you are interested in joining us and being a part of our programming going forward, we urge you to take a look at necbc.org. And we will have a tape available, video available of this presentation up on our website soon, and get the word out about that. So again, thank you all to our panelists, to the NECBC team, and Senator Peter Welch from Vermont and his staff. Really great to get a front row view from the United States Senate. So it's almost 1:15. My job is to get you out by 1:15, and at least today I'm doing it. So thank you all very much.